The winter sun dipped low over the small town of Harmony Springs, Virginia, casting its soft, golden glow over a cemetery nestled on the edge of the woods. Snow blanketed the gravestones, their edges softened by the frost, and the town itself, with its quaint Victorian houses, seemed like something out of a Christmas card. For as long as anyone could remember, Harmony Springs had been a place where the holidays were celebrated with warmth and cheer. But amidst the twinkling lights and the laughter of carolers, there was one story whispered with both reverence and sorrow. It was the story of a cat, a quiet, unassuming feline named Oliver, who, every Christmas morning, would make his way through the snow to a single grave in the cemetery. There he would sit, his small frame pressed against the cold headstone, his eyes reflecting a grief no one could explain. It all began nearly a decade earlier, when a young widow named Grace Harper moved to Harmony Springs with her little boy, Ethan. Grace, still reeling from the sudden death of her husband, had sought refuge in the tranquility of the town, hoping it would be a place where she and Ethan could heal. They bought a small house on the edge of the woods, close enough to the cemetery that it could be seen from their kitchen window. Grace had always been a lover of animals, and when a scruffy stray cat began appearing on their porch one chilly autumn evening, she welcomed him with open arms. Ethan, just 6 years old at the time, was instantly enchanted by the orange tabby with his bright green eyes and curious tilt of the head. They named him Oliver, and from that day forward, he became a part of their little family. Oliver was no ordinary cat. He had a quiet intelligence, a sensitivity that seemed almost human. He would sit beside Ethan as he did his homework, curling up next to the boy's books as if he were listening intently. At night, when Grace's tears would silently fall as she stared at the framed photo of her late husband, Oliver would jump onto her lap, his warmth offering a kind of solace no words ever could. It was as though he understood their pain, their struggle to piece their lives back together. This quiet, unassuming connection between humans and animals is something science is only just beginning to understand. Many studies have shown that the presence of pets, especially for older adults, can profoundly reduce stress, provide companionship, and even alleviate feelings of loneliness or anxiety. Grace was learning firsthand what so many experts now confirm: the love of an animal is often the bridge to healing. The years passed, and the little family began to find their footing again. Ethan grew older, his laughter once more filling the halls of their home, and Grace found joy in the simple things: baking cookies for the holidays, decorating their Christmas tree, and watching the snow fall from their cozy living room. And always, Oliver was there, a steadfast presence, his quiet purrs a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was love. But then came the Christmas of 2014, a day that would change everything. Ethan, now 14, had grown into a kind-hearted boy with a love for music. He had saved up for months to buy a second-hand guitar, and his greatest joy was sitting by the fire, strumming softly as Oliver lay curled at his feet. That morning, the snow was falling in fat, lazy flakes as Grace prepared breakfast in the kitchen. Ethan had bundled up to take Oliver outside for a quick play in the snow, as he often did. But as the minutes turned to hours and neither of them returned, a gnawing worry began to creep over her. Grace found Ethan lying motionless at the edge of the woods, Oliver frantically circling him, his tiny paws leaving desperate imprints in the snow. The paramedics later told her it was a congenital heart defect, something they had never known about, something they could not have foreseen. He was gone, just like that, and the world that Grace had painstakingly rebuilt shattered once more. In the days that followed, Grace was a shadow of herself. She buried Ethan in the cemetery they had once walked past on their way to town, choosing a spot beneath a tall oak tree where the sunlight danced through the leaves. Oliver, too, seemed lost. He would wander the house, meowing softly as if calling for Ethan, his once bright eyes dulled with sadness. And then, on Christmas morning, Grace found him sitting by Ethan's grave, his small body pressed against the cold stone as the snow fell gently around him. It became a ritual. Every Christmas morning, without fail, Oliver would make his way to the grave. Grace didn't know how he always knew the day, whether it was the scent of pine from the tree they decorated or the faint strains of Christmas music on the radio. But he always knew. And so, the years rolled on, the town quietly marveling at the loyalty of the little cat who seemed to carry the weight of his own grief. For Grace, however, this ritual wasn't just about grief. It was a lifeline. In Oliver's quiet presence, she found the strength to keep moving forward. It's something countless people in her situation have discovered. Animals don't just accompany us, they help heal us. This powerful connection is one of the reasons why animal companionship is so often recommended as a means of improving mental health, particularly for older adults struggling with loss or isolation. As the story begins, it is now Christmas Eve in Harmony Springs once again. Grace, older now, her hair streaked with gray, sits by the window with a cup of tea in hand, watching the snow fall. Oliver, his once vivid fur now tinged with white, sleeps by the fire. Outside, the lights of the town twinkle merrily, but the air inside the house is heavy with the unspoken anticipation of what tomorrow will bring. Because Grace knows that, despite the years that have passed, Oliver will rise with the sun, his tired legs carrying him once more to the grave of the boy he loved. Little does she know, this Christmas will bring a revelation, one that will not only honor Ethan's memory but also remind her, and everyone who hears Oliver's story, of the enduring power of love. And perhaps, without even realizing it, Grace's story might help others understand why animals are such remarkable companions in times of loss, love, and healing. This is something we explore deeply in How Animals Transform Human Mental Health in the Third Age, a resource designed to help people like Grace uncover the unique ways pets can enrich and transform their emotional well-being. The glow of the fireplace flickered across the room as Christmas Eve deepened in Harmony Springs. Grace sat in her worn armchair, staring at the fire's embers, her hands wrapped tightly around the mug of tea that had long gone cold. Across from her, Oliver lay curled in his usual spot by the hearth, his breathing slow but steady. Though he was still the same loyal companion he had always been, the years had taken their toll on the aging tabby. His once bright orange fur was now muted with gray, his movements slower and more deliberate. Yet, his spirit remained unbroken. Grace had come to accept that each Christmas morning, Oliver would make the solemn journey to Ethan's grave, even as his body began to betray him. And though it pained her to watch him go, she never stopped him. She couldn't, not when she saw the resolve in his green eyes, a determination that echoed her own undying love for her son. The town had taken notice of Oliver's Christmas ritual over the years. People would often gather at the cemetery, standing at a respectful distance as the little cat sat quietly by Ethan's grave. Children who had grown up hearing the story would leave small offerings at the headstone, a handmade ornament, a sprig of holly, or a note addressed to Ethan, wishing him a Merry Christmas in heaven. Oliver, ever vigilant, would sit there until the cold became too much, and then he would slowly make his way back home, his small paw prints trailing through the snow. To the townsfolk, it was a symbol of love and loyalty, a poignant reminder of the bonds that could never be broken, not even by death. But for Grace, Oliver was more than a symbol. He was a lifeline, a reminder that even in her darkest days, she wasn't truly alone. This is one of the reasons why experts suggest animal companionship for people navigating grief or loneliness, particularly older adults. It's not just about having a pet. It's about having a source of unconditional love when the world feels unbearably heavy. That evening, as Grace sat lost in her thoughts, the wind howled outside, rattling the windows. The weather forecast had warned of a severe snowstorm overnight, and the thought of Oliver making his journey in the morning filled Grace with a deep sense of dread. She looked over at him, her heart clenching as she noticed the way his chest rose and fell with effort. He was no longer the spry cat who had chased Ethan through the snow all those years ago. His movements had grown slower over the past month, and Grace knew that his time with her was drawing to a close. She had tried to coax him into staying home last Christmas, but Oliver had simply sat by the door, staring at her with that familiar, unyielding gaze until she relented. This year, however, was different. The storm was expected to be the worst in a decade, and Grace couldn't bear the thought of him out there, alone and vulnerable in the biting cold. As the clock struck midnight, signaling the arrival of Christmas Day, Grace made a decision. She would not let Oliver leave this year. She couldn't. For once, she would stop him, not to deny him his ritual, but to protect him. She walked over to where he lay by the fire, kneeling down and gently stroking his fur. "I can't let you go this time, Ollie," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Ethan wouldn't want you to get hurt. He wouldn't want me to lose you too." But Grace underestimated Oliver's resolve. As the first rays of dawn broke through the storm clouds, she awoke to find the front door ajar and tiny paw prints in the fresh snow leading toward the cemetery. Panic gripped her chest as she hurriedly wrapped herself in a coat and boots, grabbing a flashlight before stepping out into the blizzard. The wind whipped around her, stinging her face and numbing her fingers as she followed the faint trail of prints. The snow was coming down so hard now that she could barely see a few feet in front of her. "Oliver," she called, her voice swallowed by the howling wind. "Oliver, come back." The cemetery was eerily quiet when she arrived, the snow muffling all sound. The trail of paw prints led her directly to Ethan's grave, just as she had feared. And there he was, Oliver, sitting steadfastly by the headstone, his frail body trembling against the cold. Grace's breath caught in her throat as she approached, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Ollie," she choked out, kneeling in the snow beside him. She scooped him up into her arms, his tiny frame alarmingly light against her chest. "Why do you do this to yourself?" she whispered, pressing her face into his fur as the snow swirled around them. It was in this moment, clutching Oliver in the freezing cold, that Grace realized something profound. His loyalty wasn't just about grief. It was about connection. Animals, she thought, had a way of showing us how to remain tethered to love, even in our darkest hours. As she sat there, holding Oliver and sobbing softly, something caught her eye, a small, weathered box nestled at the base of the gravestone. She hadn't noticed it before, and it certainly hadn't been there the last time she visited. With trembling hands, she reached for the box, brushing off the snow to reveal a faded note tied to the lid. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Ethan's. Her heart raced as she carefully opened the box, revealing its contents, a crumpled piece of paper and a small, tarnished locket. Unfolding the paper, Grace read the words written in her son's familiar scrawl. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means you found the box. I asked Mr. Davis from next door to bury it here for me. I want you to know how much I love you, and how much I love Oliver too. He's my best friend, and I know he'll look after you when I can't anymore. Please don't be sad. I'll always be with you. Merry Christmas, Mom." The note shook something deep inside her, cracking open the walls of grief that she had built around her heart. She clutched the locket, opening it to find a tiny photo of her, Ethan, and Oliver, taken during their first Christmas in Harmony Springs. It was as if Ethan had reached out across time to remind her that love never truly dies. She looked down at Oliver, who gazed up at her with tired but peaceful eyes, as though he, too, understood the message. In that moment, Grace knew that Oliver had been more than her companion. He had been her healer, her reminder of love's enduring power. It's something so many people discover about their pets later in life. In fact, this profound connection is one of the core themes explored in How Animals Transform Human Mental Health in the Third Age, a guide filled with stories and research about how animals can help us overcome life's greatest challenges. But the storm was worsening, and Grace knew they couldn't stay there much longer. Cradling Oliver close to her chest, she began the slow journey back to the house, the box and its precious contents tucked safely in her pocket. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that this Christmas morning was different, like it was leading to something greater than she could yet understand. By the time Grace and Oliver returned home, the snowstorm had reached a near-blinding intensity. The wind howled against the windows, rattling them in their frames, and the warmth of the house felt almost surreal after the bone-chilling cold of the cemetery. Grace gently placed Oliver on the sofa near the fireplace, wrapping him in one of Ethan's old blankets. He let out a soft, weary purr, his eyes closing as his frail body sank into the comforting folds of the fabric. Grace knelt beside him, stroking his fur with trembling hands, her mind still reeling from the discovery of Ethan's box and the words her son had left behind. The locket hung heavily in her palm, a tangible reminder of a love that had transcended time and loss. As she opened it once more, seeing the tiny photo of herself, Ethan, and Oliver smiling back at her, the grief that had weighed her down for so long began to shift. It wasn't gone, it never would be, but it no longer felt as suffocating. In its place was something softer, something warmer. It reminded her of what she had recently read about the unique power of animal companionship in healing grief and fostering connection, especially for older adults. Pets, as she now fully understood, are far more than animals. They are emotional anchors, capable of helping us move forward when it feels impossible. As the hours passed, the storm outside grew fiercer, the snow piling high against the windows. The town of Harmony Springs was buried in a white silence, and Grace could only hope that the other residents were safe and warm in their homes. She sat by the fire with Oliver nestled close, watching the flames dance as her thoughts turned over and over. For years, Oliver's journey to Ethan's grave had felt like a burden to her, a painful reminder of what she had lost. But now, with Ethan's note in her hand and Oliver still by her side, she realized it was never about loss. It was about love. Every year, Oliver had reminded her of the love that Ethan had left behind, urging her to hold on, even when she felt like she couldn't. The storm outside still raged when a sudden knock echoed through the house, startling Grace from her thoughts. She frowned, setting her mug of tea down and pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. Who could possibly be out in weather like this? When she opened the door, she was greeted by a blast of icy wind and the sight of a young woman bundled in a thick coat, her cheeks flushed from the cold. In her arms was a small, shivering kitten, its fur matted with snow and its tiny body trembling uncontrollably. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said quickly, her breath visible in the frigid air. "I found this little guy on the road outside my motel. He was crying, and I couldn't just leave him out there. Your house was the only one with a light on. Can you help?" Grace's heart tightened at the sight of the kitten. Its big, frightened eyes and pitiful meows pulled at something deep inside her, a familiar ache that she couldn't quite explain. Without hesitation, she ushered the woman inside, closing the door firmly against the storm. "Bring him over by the fire," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "We'll get him warmed up." The woman introduced herself as Lily, a college student passing through Harmony Springs on her way home for the holidays. The storm had forced her to stop in town, and while walking near her motel, she had heard the faint cries of the kitten. "I couldn't leave him," Lily said softly, glancing toward the kitten now nestled in Grace's lap. "He looked so scared and alone. I just hope I did the right thing." "You did," Grace assured her, stroking the kitten's fur gently as its tiny body quivered in her hands. "He wouldn't have made it out there much longer." The kitten let out a soft mew, burrowing deeper into the folds of the towel Grace had wrapped around him. She felt her heart begin to swell with a strange mixture of sadness and hope. In that moment, Grace realized how much this tiny, vulnerable creature mirrored the companionship she had found in Oliver all those years ago. It was another reminder of how animals, even the smallest and most fragile, have a way of drawing us back to love and connection. As many have experienced, and as explained in How Animals Transform Human Mental Health in the Third Age, these bonds with animals can help heal wounds we didn't even know we carried. The night wore on, and the three of them, Grace, Lily, and the kitten, sat by the fire, sharing warmth and stories. Lily, as it turned out, was studying to become a veterinarian. She spoke with passion about her love for animals and her belief in their power to transform lives. "I've seen it so many times," Lily said, her voice soft but certain. "Animals don't just heal physically, they heal emotionally too. I've seen patients with anxiety or depression find hope again just by forming a bond with a pet." Grace nodded, her fingers still gently stroking the kitten's fur. "I know that's true," she said quietly. "Oliver has been my lifeline through so much. And now, with him getting older," her voice faltered, and Lily placed a comforting hand on her arm. "You gave him a beautiful life," Lily said. "And it sounds like he gave you one, too. That's the most anyone could hope for." The snowstorm began to ease as dawn broke over Harmony Springs, but the storm within Grace's heart had already started to calm. She looked at the kitten, now asleep in her lap, and then at Oliver, resting peacefully in his spot by the fire. The weight of the past seemed to lift, replaced by the quiet knowledge that she wasn't alone. Not now, not ever. Love, she realized, wasn't something that could be lost. It simply changed shape, finding new ways to express itself. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, Grace made a decision. "His name will be Noel," she said softly, glancing down at the kitten with a smile. "It feels right for Christmas, don't you think?" Lily nodded, her own smile warm and understanding. Oliver stirred slightly at the sound of Grace's voice, his green eyes flickering open for just a moment. For the first time in years, Grace thought she saw peace in his gaze, a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement that his job was done, and that she was ready to take the next step. In that moment, Grace understood what Oliver had been teaching her all along, that animals don't just accompany us through life, they heal us, in ways we may never fully understand. It's a truth explored deeply in How Animals Transform Human Mental Health in the Third Age, a resource that celebrates the remarkable ways pets can restore hope and bring light to even the darkest of times. The first light of Christmas morning painted the snow-covered town of Harmony Springs in soft hues of pink and gold. Inside Grace's home, the fireplace crackled gently, casting flickering shadows over the room where profound moments of love, loss, and connection had unfolded through the night. Oliver, her steadfast companion of so many years, lay resting peacefully in his spot by the fire. Beside him, Noel, the tiny gray kitten rescued from the storm, was nestled in Grace's lap, his soft purring a delicate counterpoint to the stillness of the room. As the house bathed in the soft glow of the rising sun, Grace leaned back in her chair, cradling Noel and watching Oliver. His breathing had grown slower, his little chest rising and falling in a rhythm that Grace instinctively knew was nearing its end. She had seen this before, in her husband, in her son, and now in Oliver. But this time, the overwhelming weight of grief she had expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was a calm acceptance, a gratitude for all the years they had shared and for the lessons Oliver had taught her. It was in moments like this that Grace fully understood the profound role animals play in our lives. They not only provide comfort and companionship, but also teach us how to face life's inevitable challenges with grace and courage. A lesson explored so deeply in the guide How Animals Transform Human Mental Health in the Third Age. As the clock ticked on, Oliver stirred, his eyes fluttering open just long enough to glance at Grace. She leaned down, stroking his fur gently, whispering, "Thank you, my sweet boy. For loving Ethan. For loving me. For being there when I couldn't go on. You've done so much for us, Ollie. It's okay to rest now." Oliver let out a faint purr, soft and peaceful, and then he closed his eyes for the last time. Grace sat with him for what felt like hours, her tears falling silently as she held him close one last time. But amidst the sadness was a deep sense of peace. Oliver had been her anchor through the stormiest parts of her life, and now, as she held Noelle in her lap, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Love, she realized, wasn't gone, it had simply changed form. It had passed from Ethan to Oliver, and now it would live on in Noelle. By late morning, the storm had cleared, leaving Harmony Springs blanketed in pristine snow. The air was crisp and still as Grace and Lily ventured outside, carrying Oliver wrapped gently in Ethan's old blanket. Together, they made their way to the oak tree in Grace's yard, the same tree that had once held Ethan's swing and now stood as a silent guardian over his grave. Beneath its sheltering branches, they dug a small spot in the snow and laid Oliver to rest, close to Ethan, where Grace knew he belonged. Lily stood beside her as Grace placed a small sprig of holly on the grave, her hands trembling but her heart full. "Goodbye, Ollie," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." As they walked back to the house, Grace carried Noelle bundled in her arms, his tiny face poking out of the blanket as he gazed curiously at the snowy world around him. Inside, the warmth of the fire welcomed them back, and Grace settled into her chair with Noelle on her lap. He pawed playfully at the edges of her sweater, his soft purring filling the silence Oliver had once kept. For the first time in years, Grace felt her heart begin to open again. The days that followed were filled with quiet but meaningful change. Grace found herself smiling more, laughing even, as Noelle brought a new energy to her home. He chased after her knitting yarn, pawed at the ornaments still hanging on the Christmas tree, and curled up in her lap every evening. Though the ache of losing Oliver remained, Noelle's playful spirit reminded her that life still held joy, even after loss. It's something she came to appreciate deeply, that animals, no matter their size, have an incredible ability to rekindle a sense of purpose and connection, especially for older adults navigating life's challenges. These bonds are so beautifully explored in How Animals Transform Human Mental Health in the Third Age, which delves into the science and stories behind how animals bring healing, joy, and companionship to those who need it most. As word of Oliver's passing spread through Harmony Springs, the town came together to honor the little cat who had touched so many lives. Neighbors left flowers on Grace's porch, along with handwritten notes thanking her for sharing Oliver's story. The children, in particular, were heartbroken. They had grown up watching Oliver's yearly Christmas ritual and saw him as more than just a cat. He was a symbol of love and loyalty. To honor him, the town decided to create a small memorial in the cemetery, placing a plaque near Ethan's grave that read, "In memory of Oliver, the Christmas cat who taught us the power of love." At first, Grace hesitated to accept this gesture. It felt too grand, too public. But as she read the notes and saw how much Oliver had meant to the community, she realized his story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone. His devotion, his loyalty, and the quiet love he had carried through the years had touched more hearts than she had ever imagined. On New Year's Day, the town gathered at the cemetery for a small memorial service. Beneath the oak tree, families lit candles, shared stories, and placed small tokens of remembrance at the plaque. Grace stood at the front, holding Noelle in her arms, and spoke softly to the crowd. "Oliver taught me something I'll never forget," she said. "That love doesn't end when someone we care about is gone. It stays with us, through the memories we carry and the connections we build. And sometimes, love finds a new way to reach us, through the people and even the animals who come into our lives when we need them most." As the sun set that evening, Grace walked home with Noelle nestled in her arms, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She looked down at the kitten, who blinked up at her with wide, curious eyes, and smiled. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "Because love always finds its way back." For the first time in a long time, Grace felt hopeful. Not because the pain of losing Ethan or Oliver had disappeared, it never would, but because she had learned how to carry that love forward. Noelle was a new chapter, a reminder that healing was always possible, even in the face of loss. In Grace's story, we see just how transformative the bond between humans and animals can be, especially for those navigating grief, loneliness, or major life transitions. It's a journey countless people have experienced, and one that's explored in greater detail in how animals transform human mental health in the third age. This resource offers heartwarming stories, practical insights, and research-based strategies for those who want to embrace the healing power of animal companionship. If you or someone you love is looking to rediscover joy, hope, and connection, this guide is a perfect place to start. Click below to learn more and begin your own journey of transformation today. As the weeks turned into months, life in Harmony Springs slowly moved forward, but for Grace, something had fundamentally changed. While the grief of losing Oliver and Ethan remained, it no longer felt like a weight she had to carry alone. Instead, it became a part of her, a quiet reminder of the love that had shaped her life. Noelle, with his boundless energy and playful antics, became her constant companion, filling the once silent house with laughter and warmth. His small but mighty presence was proof that even after loss, life still had so much to give. Grace began to notice how much she was healing, not just emotionally but mentally and even physically. Caring for Noelle gave her a renewed sense of purpose, pulling her out of the fog of grief that had consumed her for so many years. The simple acts of feeding him, playing with him, and curling up with him on the sofa at night brought structure and joy back into her days. She remembered reading in a magazine about how animal companionship can be transformative for older adults, especially those facing loneliness or major life changes. And now, she was living proof of it. It's a truth deeply explored in the guide How Animals Transform Human Mental Health in the Third Age, which highlights how animals like Oliver and Noelle can help people rediscover meaning, joy, and connection. The memorial for Oliver became a cherished tradition in the town. Every Christmas morning, families would visit the cemetery to leave flowers and light candles, not just for Oliver but for their own loved ones. It became a moment of shared reflection and gratitude, a way to honor the enduring power of love. Grace, often holding Noelle in her arms, would watch as children placed handmade ornaments and small trinkets at the plaque beneath the oak tree. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride, not just in Oliver, but in the way his story had touched so many lives. Looking back on it all, Grace understood that Oliver's greatest gift wasn't his loyalty or even his love. It was the way he had shown her how to keep going, how to find light even in the darkest moments. And now, Noelle was continuing that legacy, reminding her every day that healing wasn't just possible. It was inevitable when love was at the center. Grace's journey is a reminder for all of us. The bond we share with animals can change our lives in ways we never imagined. Whether you're navigating grief, feeling the weight of loneliness, or simply looking to bring more joy into your days, animals have an unparalleled ability to heal, inspire, and connect us to what truly matters. These powerful connections are explored in How Animals Transform Human Mental Health in the Third Age, a heartfelt guide designed to help people like Grace, and like you, experience the transformative power of animal companionship. If you're ready to discover how animals can improve your mental health, reduce stress, and bring happiness back into your life, click below to learn more about this one-of-a-kind resource. Let their love transform your life, starting today.